Okay, so all that.
Okay, another question. I'm going to redo it here. So I was looking at the word magic, and I think it was Crowley who spelled it with a K on the end
That's
there,
him.
right?
He did that. That's right.
So, what's your take on magic? Is magic real, and what is it?
Do you believe in magic in a young girl's heart? Listen. Yeah, it's again, it's like magic has to do with the religious man. Again, it's not about the rational man, not about the scientific man. And it's like that's the question: do you believe?
Yeah.
Do you know? What do you know about magic? And and Crowley, he put the K on it for real magic, esoteric, like hermetics. Her magic is part of hermetics, and it's using the occult principles and languages of astrology and Kabbalah and Tarot and it's like, yeah, alchemy. So you're doing this is like high discipline stuff too. It's like really it's like invocations and prayers. And like Crowley was a prolific poet and writer of invocations and really sacred material. And but that's the split in the psyche, like the whole um, like the Renaissance movement, Galileo and Copernicus, and it's like a separating from the mystical and the religious. So separating from magic, separating from alchemy, separating from astrology. Astrology got really trash. Really, I was like, all that is outdated, old. Kind of an embarrassment. You know, and but it's like throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. That's where the magic is. Otherwise, your life's been uh, disenchanted. It's been stripped of magic and meaning. So that's a wasteland. There's a lot of information, a lot of ideas, and a lot of equipment to record it all on and preserve it. But the magic, the re-enchantment of your life, it's like the Beatles animated film Yellow Submarine. Did you ever see that? Yeah, yeah, but it's like where the blue meanies, they're just like stamping everything out and like shutting off all the music and like the Taliban, no music, no the blue, and so it's like, and everything starts turning dark and gray, and just stumbling around and down the sidewalks,
Right.
and it's like, psychedelics are a form of magic. They're a very old form of, and it was the magicians that handled it. Magicians are another word for shamans. Same thing, just another phase, another stage, another aspect of our wholeness.
You mentioned that keyword invocations, because I mean, what is the practical? How can I say it? How does the magic operate? It's a matter of invoking things, or
Yeah, but also, it's a way of addressing deity. So you have to study. Jnana yoga is very, very important. You have to study. You have to know the gods. You have to know the myths. You have to know the properties and the languages and the implements, the powers that they. And yourself. You're invoking. You're calling to. Uh, it's a form of prayer too, but it's also invocation is more. There's more will involved. Like magic has a lot of. It's like the will of the magician, the will of the shaman. The rainmaker and things like this. And it's like, um, so you're addressing a particular deity, and so for instance, you're addressing Jupiter, you're addressing Zeus. He's a god of great intuition and magnanimousness and great prolific. Many children, many gods, many heroes, many culture heroes. He's the and then in just astrological language, he's considered the higher mind. So he's wisdom, he's higher knowledge, like university wisdom. Like graduate work, postgraduate work is all in that sphere. In the outer exoteric, the outer forms of that university, but the inner forms are the initiations, the mystery schools, and you're familiarizing yourself with the deities. Your personal pantheon. And astrology is a critical part of that. You just see, you see where your planets are, how they're related to each other. This stuff is ancient. Of course, it goes all the way back to beginnings of astrology and before that. The work of the life of the shamans and the different plants that they had mastered. And the women did that too. The women were the ones that got the plants. The men were hunting, fighting amongst themselves and stuff, who's in charge, And so invocation is very precise. It's like, like doing a search, on your phone or computer, you know the deity. So Hermes is a whole other matter. But he has a deep relationship with Jupiter too. So it's like you call it magical thinking in a way. You're mythic thinking. And how Jung at the beginning, the pioneering stages of modern psychology. And we talked about this before, but he did his internship in the psychiatric hospital at Burgholtzi in Zurich. And so he was working with the hospitalized population and people with schizophrenia and multiple personality disorders and bipolar disorders. It's called manic depression, and but particularly the schizophrenics, they're the ones that are most like hallucinatory, and disconnected, and like they're totally swallowed up by the unconscious. So you're like and schizophrenics don't dream, so because they're living a waking dream. There's like the poles have reversed. But Jung, he's young. He was young. I think he was like 24. He's already married to Emma, and they've moved into university housing, and they ended up having 5 children. And it was during that time he met Freud, about after he was fully licensed and already was doing his own research. But when he was, like going on the ward and looking at the, and there was no medications back then. It was like if you got really out of hand, they just would, put you in a straitjacket or tie you to the bed, something, and they still do that, That's a big subject, and there are medications. Medications like Thorazine was the first, and then there's a whole other category called neuroleptics, like later generations of that. But the categorization is Thorazine, and then the later, like the neuroleptics, like Seroquel and quitapine and others. They're called neuroleptics, they call them, but they're major tranquilizers. Well, there are therapies, and R.D. Laing was a British psychiatrist, and he did some amazing work, but it was like, the prognosis, it depends how far gone they are in that, and how, if it's acute or chronic is another important factor. If it's a relatively new schizophrenia, and it's like, but R.D. Laing, there's one case I remember where this woman living in London and, had her own apartment there, and she was like having these bouts of like spontaneous like catatonia. And she's getting ready for work, and the next thing she knows, she's like, she's holding a cup of cold coffee, and it's like 6 o'clock at night. This kind of stuff, like whereas like there's big walls being built because schizophrenia has to do with a fragmentation and a compartmentalization. There's usually some major trauma involved, in a lot of a lot of manic depression, bipolar disorder too, a lot of violence in the home and such things, and but what he did in this case is so our parents were, really concerned, of course, you're pretty vulnerable, right? If you happen to be out on the tube or something, it's going back and forth or something. And so he was doing therapy with her, and what he did, he got her a job as a model at an art college. It's perfect. She's see perfectly still,
Yeah.
And he was very creative, and Stan Grof also did a lot of work with this, and Naropa too, in the contemplative psychology. These people were my neighbor, literally, or right next door to me, which is a synchronicity, called Windhorse Foundation, and Stan Grof had done a lot with this too, like we're not using medications, but it was like people were in a, they're like in a in-house situation. They don't go out, and you're just allowing the schizophrenia to happen, and you interact with it, and like the Windhorse Foundation in Boulder, like they were, the doctors were involved and the professors were involved. Like my psychiatrist was a professor at Naropa. He was an amazing person, deep meditator and a master of pharmaceuticals. And Antonio Wood, he and his wife from Chile, they escaped the coup of 1973 there, and set up by George Bush, CIA. All that, it's a whole other matter. But so graduate students in the contemplative, people going for their master's degree in psychology at Naropa, and they would be like doing their internship in there. They like live with you'd get like, there'd be like day assignments. Some people would be, like live-in staff. And you're just like, creating a safe environment, and there's food, there's nothing to harm yourself with, or sharp instruments, but you're just allowing it to, and many times then it will resolve itself. Because one of the problems that gets blunted by strong psychiatric medical intervention, pharmaceuticals, really powerful stuff, and it like freezes the whole process. This is, like schizophrenia thing, that's where shamans came from. We talked all about that as well earlier. And so and like in India too, you see people that, be hospitalized in a millisecond in the West. They wouldn't be on the street, but they go, oh, this one has potential, And they do, like Amma too, like Don and Carola there. She was like, they would have locked her up. She would, just medicated, put the chemical straitjacket on you. Pharmaceutical straitjacket, That's how they handle mystics in the West. And it's frightening. It's frightening for people. It's frightening for, so it's like, so yeah. And so that happens. There are places that, like transpersonal psychologists. And like my doctor, there's Antonio. He was like, a meditation, he was teaching the integration of meditation into psychiatric practice, psychiatric and psychotherapeutic psychotherapy practices, such things. And then Grof was using psychedelics, and then he went into breath, but he did the exact same thing. He developed this whole, he called it spiritual emergence. It's not a disorder. That's the mind, the institutions and the the controlling agents, and usually you get, people in psychiatric hospitals, they get picked up off the street. You're a ward of the state. So you're not in the best facilities. You're definitely going to get medicated to the max, and you have very little contact with any therapy or so this is like you have to have like support from family that can, because it's not inexpensive. You have to be to be in house and taken care of, and but it's like a rebirth process. That's what's trying to happen. The ego's died in a sense. Like in schizophrenia, it's like the ego has ceased to exist in any coherent, cogent form. And really, the archetypal unconscious is like rewiring a new. And that's why mystical state. You're coming from ego to self. And and if you abort that, so it's like, and sometimes medication is necessary. It's essential if there's severe insomnia, and a lot of suffering, man. It's a very, a lot of suffering in that dimension. That's the crucifixion process, you're like, and you're so isolated, you're so alone, you're so separate from the, you can't go to school, you can't go to work, can't go to, like I didn't have a phone call in 7 years during my process there, from, age 19 to 25, right through there, 24, something like that. But